Good evening, everyone, and welcome to COS at Home. I am your host, Jonathan Viod. Thank you so much for joining us. We have a great show lined up for you this evening. We have an important tool that we're going to be sharing with you during our Action at Home segment. There are also some new items in the Article 5 Outfitters store that we want to share with you just in time for the holiday season. For our main event, the interview segment of the program, we are excited that tonight we are going to be joined by Convention of States' Senior Vice President for Legislative Affairs, Rita Peters. Before we get started, though, next Tuesday is an important holiday that does not get the attention and recognition it rightfully deserves, and that is Veterans Day. We at Convention of States greatly admire, respect, and appreciate all of the sacrifices made by our veterans and their families to protect our freedom and liberties, with so many choosing to continue their service to our country by advancing the Article 5 movement. So to all of our amazing veterans, we thank you, we love you, and we salute you. We also wanted to let you know about a special broadcast that is happening next Tuesday starting at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, which will feature the testimonies of U.S. military veterans who continue to serve their country through their activism with COS. So please join us for Veterans Voices on Veterans Day. Again, there, Producer G's got it on the screen, 6 p.m. Eastern Time next Tuesday. Also, our friends, as I mentioned at the top, our friends at the Article 5 Outfitters wanted us to let you know about some exciting new gear in our store, and just in time for Christmas, Producer G is going to share some of the items on the screen now. We have an awesome line of shirts, hoodies, and hats honoring the amazing Charlie Kirk. I think, as you can see right now, I'm wearing a shirt that's about Charlie Kirk, but this is not a Convention of States shirt. I'm going to be getting my Freedom shirt soon. I should have ordered it sooner so I could have it on the call tonight to share with all of you. But there you see it right there on the store. Some hats, some mugs, a lot of other great items as well. Just honoring Charlie Kirk. I think we put together a great line of those items. There are obviously so much more things that are available. So go ahead on over there and make sure you shop for your favorite Patriot this Christmas season by visiting shopconventionofstates.com. Now, I usually start the show by giving you an introduction to Convention of States and telling you what we are all about. However, we recently decided that perhaps it would be better for you to hear an introduction or information about Convention of States from our activists. And tonight, we have a great clip from one of our legendary activists. That is Michael Riley from Maryland. Check it out.
Having a hard time in America right now. We're supposed to love our neighbors, not be afraid of each other. We need to have a nationwide discussion about who we are and where we want to go as Americans. Congress doesn't seem to be listening. Social media and the news don't seem to be helping out. So we need to have that conversation, and it has to have some effect too. The way to have that conversation is for we the people to go to our state legislators and use Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution. That way we can call a convention of states to discuss a limited set of topics that can start to address the problems that we're having. It's not going to be a complete answer, but at least it's to start to have that nationwide discussion. And that's why I'm part of the Convention of States Action Team. My name is Mike Riley, and I'm from Maryland.
Thank you so much, Michael, for that explanation. And ladies and gentlemen, if you do not know who Michael Riley is and you have not had a chance to watch the recording of the awards dinner at the Race to Freedom Leadership Summit, I want to encourage you to take the time to watch it. And I think Producer G is going to share it on the screen as to how you can get there. The reason that I mentioned that is because Michael is, as I mentioned, one of our legendary activists. And the reason for that is because a few years ago, Michael was given the heart-wrenching diagnosis that he has ALS. And despite his body's deterioration from that dreaded disease, Michael still dedicates time to Convention of States, consistently participating in our social media campaigns. He's an inspiration to us all, and we are so thankful for Michael. So if you would, please keep Michael and his family in your prayers. And Michael, if you're watching, we love you. We're so grateful for you. We appreciate you, my friend. And thank you for everything that you do. And in that recording of the awards dinner from the Saturday night event at the Leadership Summit, we were able to award Michael with a very special award. It was the John Quincy Adams Duty is Ours Award. And there's no one more deserving than Michael Riley. And Michael, we just so appreciate you. Very quickly, there are two things I want to add to Michael's comments. One, our resolution calls for a convention to address three specific items. Michael alluded to it. Those three items, though, are imposing fiscal restraints on the federal government, reducing the size and scope of the federal government, and placing term limits on members of Congress and federal officials. Second, I want to take a minute to mention our mission, because we are more than a convention with Convention of States. Our mission statement is to build the largest engaged army of self-governing grassroots activists in American history, or the way I put it, to re-establish a culture of self-governance. The founders built a system of governance that was dependent on an active and educated citizenry, but unfortunately, we Americans have allowed the comfort and distractions of everyday life to prevent us from doing our duty. Convention of States is focused on changing that, and we hope you will join us. And as Michael mentioned, this convention, it's just a conversation. It's centered on those three subject areas, but only recommendations can come out of the convention. And then it will be up to the states as to whether or not they want to add those recommendations to the Constitution. Now, is usually at this point in the program where we would pivot to our 5 for 5 segment. However, we're changing up the order of our show a bit tonight, as 5 for 5 connects really well with our Action at Home segment. So we'll get to both of those a little later on. Right now, though, it is time for Jake Fay with COS Now.
Brand new endorser, a Wild West tour, and a committee hearing in October. All of that and more on this week's episode of COS Now.
What do we want? When do we want it? Now!
What do you call a best-selling author, successful podcaster, public speaker, and prominent homeschool advocate who candidly addresses faith, culture, and politics? You call her an official endorser of Convention of States. Heidi St. John has added her name to the roll of influential Americans who have officially endorsed the most effective grassroots movement in American politics. In a statement, she wrote, quote, "As a homeschool mom of 7 and a former candidate for Congress, I understand just how damaging and overbearing intrusive federal government has been to our nation's educational system. This is why I fully support and endorse Convention of States." Additionally, we're pleased to announce that Heidi St. John will be a guest on COS at Home the very first Wednesday of January. On Tuesday, the Ohio State Government Oversight Committee held another public hearing on Convention of States legislation. Here's Convention of States Michael Ferris there to speak in favor of the bill.
It is going to be the dominant feature of federal spending is paying the debt. It's already very large feature, but it's going to be a majority before long. And we simply need to do something. And my respectful request is this. We've talked about it long enough in Ohio. Please, let's get this done.
Local leaders also spoke in favor of COS, including this heartfelt testimony from longtime volunteer Ginny Watkins.
Nature has me in the twilight of my life, too, and I regret that I won't be able much longer to push on in this fight for freedom. And so I appeal to you, the statespeople of our time, here in this august and powerful body, to do your duty in helping solve our country's most pressing problems.
Immediately following the hearing, the Ohio team held a rally outside the Capitol building. Several state legislators spoke, including Representative Bernie Willis.
We had infinitely wise founding fathers inspired by God to put something together that includes Article 5. It is there for a reason. It is there for a cause. I greatly appreciate the fact that all of you have elevated to be part of this cause, and I truly believe that we're going to become the next state to pass a resolution for Convention of States. Thank you all so much.
And here's Senator Michelle Reynolds.
And I know that the same founding fathers who had the wisdom and whom we've trusted to have a constitution that we've been able to carry forward for generations, they foresaw that there may be a time that it may need some assistance or correction. And they were wise enough to say that the states would be able to be that rep.
Now it's time for the final five. Number 1, last month, COS Action President Mark Meckler and Patriot Academy President Rick Green hit the road at full speed to spread the word about Article 5, making stops in Bozeman and Laurel, Montana, before heading to Sheridan, Wyoming. Number 2, COS state teams are reporting a ton of activity. The Hawaii team collected petitions at a gun show in Honolulu, COS volunteers attended a festival in West Virginia, and North Carolina is holding meetings across the state. Number 3, COS Vice President for Legislative Affairs Rita Peters responded to a hit piece that had been published by The Hill. And South Carolina Representative Bill Taylor submitted an op-ed of his own, calling out Congress for being incapable of fixing the problems facing our nation. He pointed to Convention of States as the only solution as big as the problem. Number 4, here are a few of my favorite photos sent in from across the country, including Illinois, Wisconsin, Idaho, Alaska, Colorado, Kentucky, and Massachusetts. And number 5, while attending the Race to Freedom Leadership Summit, I shared the mic with some fellow COS Patriots to ask them a few pretty important questions.
Next question. Would you rather be stuck on an airplane with Nancy Pelosi or have Bernie Sanders as your waiter at a restaurant?
Oh, Bernie Sanders for sure. I get to imitate him the entire time, like do the voice. Bernie, did I do that right?
If you were to ask for a tip, I would say, yeah, that's capitalism. You can't have a tip.
Would you rather go golfing with President Trump or go on a hunting trip with Vice President Vance?
I'd probably go golfing, even though I can't golf.
So Trump would beat you?
Yeah, goes without saying, but...
Thanks for joining us for another episode. Remember to like and subscribe, and until next time, this is Jake Fay signing off from COS Now.
Thank you, Jake, for that. And a lot of great stuff that's going on across the nation. Big tip of the cap to Ohio. Yes, dear. Another time. Go. Okay. Goodbye. Oh, this is COS at home, isn't it? Big shout out to the Ohio team there for having that hearing last week and showing up. I know it has been a challenge for us to continue to move that resolution forward there in Ohio, but I know that they are doing some great work, and we're so thankful that Mike Farris was able to be out there for that hearing, and a lot of other great things that are happening. And it's exciting to see these types of committee hearings taking place now, right? Because usually at this time of the year, things aren't happening in the legislature. Many legislatures are actually starting to gear up for their next legislative session, but it's exciting to see things going on in Ohio. And I will also add that Massachusetts is going to be having a hearing next Thursday, November 13th, and our COS Live team featuring Rita Peters and Andrew Lush will be broadcasting the hearing on all of our COS social media platforms. So be sure to be on the lookout for that. We're very, very excited, and good luck to our Massachusetts team ahead of that hearing. Without further ado, we now have the great pleasure of welcoming back to the COS at Home program, the Convention of States Senior Vice President for Legislative Affairs, Rita Peters. Rita, how are you doing this evening?
Hi, Jonathan. I am doing great. Thanks for having me back on the program.
We're so happy to have you, and it's an honor, really, to have you with us again. So I think we should start with the big news item of the day, and that is the election results from last night. Voters in New Jersey, my former state, and Virginia, your home state, as well as New York City and some other places, overwhelmingly voted for Democrats. And to me, really the most shocking result was that in Virginia, y'all elected Jay Jones as Attorney General after reports emerged of old text messages of where he was fantasizing about the murder of a Republican legislator and that legislator's young children. As a Virginian, what did last night's results reveal or confirm to you about your state? And does it tell us anything about where we are as a nation right now?
Jonathan, do we have to talk about this? There are lots of other things I would rather be discussing with you right now. Well, to say the least, it was very discouraging, Jonathan. And as you pointed out, particularly that the people, the voters of Virginia, the mother of presidents, would elect Jay Jones after the text came out that you described of him fantasizing about the killing of a former Virginia Speaker of the House, Todd Gilbert, who, by the way, I know personally. He is really an amazing man whom I really admire and respect. What it tells me is that we're, you know, largely just not civil anymore. A lot of the people, a lot of the voters out there just have cast civility by the wayside. And it's particularly surprising after the assassination of Charlie Kirk. You would have thought that people would be outraged by this kind of behavior by someone running for one of the highest offices in the state. So I'm very discouraged by it. It's very disheartening. However, I, always have to come back to God's still on his throne. And I lead a middle school girls Bible study for my church, Jonathan, and we're studying the book of Esther. And one of the things you see really clearly when you read the book of Esther is how God is orchestrating things behind the scenes. You can't see it. It's not visible to us regular people, but he works through even evil rulers and kings and administrations to accomplish his good purposes. So I do believe that, and that is where ultimately my trust is. But I'm very discouraged, Jonathan, about the outcome of the election, particularly in Virginia.
I don't blame you at all. And you're absolutely right about the Lord still being on the throne. It reminds me also of what Joseph said to his brothers, what you intended for evil, God intended for good. And so we know that he can use evil for the goodness that is him. So I think that is absolutely where we need to put our faith as we move forward. Just always keeping that at the forefront. I think I recently said my North Star is the cross. And I think that is important for us. Even when we see things that are shocking and horrifying that happen in these elections, we need to keep everything in a proper perspective as much as possible, even though it is very discouraging, as you pointed out. Now, Rita, we actually have some breaking news to share with everyone. I'm only half joking because for some, this may actually be some breaking news. The federal government has been shut down since October 1st. And
What?
Yeah, can you believe it? I'm shocked.
Say it isn't so.
It has been shut down, and it's not a top news item. I think perhaps with the exception of government workers and military personnel, most Americans really haven't noticed that the government is shut down. So do you think the fact that most of the nation doesn't realize this is happening or even seem concerned about it bolsters the case for why we need an Article 5 convention?
Yes, I do, Jonathan. If our federal government can shut down and we don't even really feel it for this long, I think that says something about whether or not we really need the federal government to be spending $6.1 trillion of our money. That's the amount it spent in fiscal 2024. Now, of course, the federal government does have legitimate functions assigned to it by our Constitution. And of course, we want it to be doing those things, running and maintaining the military, managing international affairs, immigration and border control. There are lots of legitimate things for the federal government to be doing that are extremely important. However, so much of what the federal government does should be done at the state level. And frankly, that should also correspond to a much lower federal tax burden. Taxpayer dollars should stay largely within the states. And then the state should be performing the vast majority of government functions, the actual policy making that touches our lives on a daily basis. This is the way the Constitution designed our government to work. And we really need to get back to that. Of course, that's what Convention of States is all about. So yes, I do think this gives us just an example of how, yeah, it can work that way. We don't need the federal government managing every aspect of our daily lives. We can get along just fine on our own as self-governing citizens. Thank you very much.
Amen to that. We've got a question about this later on. I'm just curious to get your take on it. There's talk about, and I think President Trump is calling for the nuclear option, which is getting rid of the filibuster in the Senate. Where do you come down on that?
I understand how that can sound appealing, but I do think that the filibuster serves a legitimate function of being able to slow things down. You know, we want our Congress to be deliberate, you know, and to really take its time before it makes big changes, because we don't want to see massive sea changes in federal law when the government swings from one administration, you know, one party to the next. So I actually think the filibuster serves a legitimate function. I'm not a huge fan of just getting rid of it. I would listen to the opposing side. I'm open, but that's kind of where I come down on it right now.
Yeah, and you know what you say about the big swings in government. That's also my concern about the way the executive orders have been utilized, and it just seems like because Congress isn't taking action and codifying things into law, we have administration after administration coming in and issuing all of these executive orders. And right now, with President Trump and where we believe, you know, a lot of the things that he's been doing very pro liberty and good, and so we're in favor of that. But we know that things that are done by executive order can be undone by executive order, and we're seeing those massive swings. And I think that's really problematic for our country.
And
Now,
Jonathan, I think you pointed to something that's really important, and that is we need to be people of integrity and intellectual honesty and not support something the president does necessarily just because we like the result. If the process is wrong, and if the president is doing something that's outside the scope of his legitimate constitutional authority, then we should not be supporters of that. Because what does that do when the other party is in power, and then, you know, we want to cry foul because it's outside the bounds of the Constitution? Well, you know, we have to be constitutionalists no matter who is in power. I'm really a strong believer in that. And then back to your question about the filibuster, especially now at this point in history when we see Congress actually exercising power beyond what is legitimate under the Constitution, it would be particularly dangerous for us to create a situation where it can exercise that power more easily without resistance from the minority party. So, yeah, I agree with everything you just said.
so it's hard to believe that we are less than 2 months from a new year, but I can't believe I was just talking about Christmas earlier in the program when talking about the Article 5 outfitters. But that, of course, means your department is getting busier and busier as we gear up for the 2026 legislative sessions, and we're getting ready for them to kick off. I have a few different questions to ask you about what we can expect this legislative session or legislative season, but I will start by asking the question on everyone's minds, which is, which states seem to have the best opportunities to pass the resolution in 2026?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I am working really hard to sort all of that out, and, you know, working with the state teams on strategies and what they're going to be working on in 2026. Have to start, I'm going to give you your list that you asked for, but I have to start by recognizing Kansas, which may already be state number 20. For those of you who don't know, Kansas has already passed our COS application by a simple majority in both chambers. And we actually have, we're watching a case that is in the federal district court in Kansas to determine the constitutionality of a Kansas constitutional provision that purports to require a supermajority vote in Kansas in order to pass an Article 5 application. Well, that is unconstitutional under Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution, which supersedes the Kansas Constitution on that. But we're waiting for a ruling on that. Even so, earlier this year, the COS application passed the Senate again by a supermajority vote, and it's still pending in the Kansas House as we move into 2026. And we're just shy of having a supermajority support in the House. So all that to say, Jonathan, there are two different ways that Kansas could become state number 20. One, if we get a favorable court ruling, or two, if we get a supermajority vote in the House. So Kansas, definitely one to watch moving into 2026. Next on my list has to be Ohio. We have had a really great forward movement in both chambers in Ohio already this year, and our resolutions do carry over into 2026. You saw a little bit earlier about the recent committee hearing in Ohio. Committees in the House and Senate haven't voted yet in this session, but we do expect votes to be coming up, fairly soon, hopefully fairly soon in 2026. So Ohio is definitely in the race to be state number 20. North Carolina, we're all continuing to watch as well. Of course, we passed once again in the North Carolina House earlier this year, and our resolution does carry over into 2026. We just need the North Carolina Senate leadership to lead on this and get our application through committee and to the floor, where we think if it goes to the Senate floor, we believe it will pass. So watch North Carolina. And then another three I'll just mention briefly. South Dakota, very close, could definitely happen early in 2026. Iowa is on the cusp, and also Idaho. I don't know if you've covered this at all on your program, Jonathan, but just recently we got outstanding polling results in Idaho showing that 78% of Idaho voters across party lines support Convention of States. So I'm sure hoping that the legislators take notice of that and do their part to make it happen. I'm really hopeful about that.
Those are amazing polling results. I'm not sure if we had the opportunity to cover it on the program, so I'm so glad you mentioned it, Rita. So there are quite a few states there that we are looking at that have opportunities this year. So folks, if you are in any one of those states, now's the time. Sign up, become a Convention of States activist, help us get it across the finish line. The legislators need to hear from you. You matter so much to them. You need to be the ones that are leading on this. So please help us out. If you're in any one of those states, sign up, become a Convention of States activist. Frankly, if you're in any state, you want to sign up and become a Convention of States activist. But you have the opportunity to be a part of history and get us across the finish line. So I hope you'll consider that. Now, I make a point to mention on every show, Rita, that at Convention of States, we are more than a convention. However, I think it's a point that does get lost sometimes, especially given our name, Convention of States. We have discussed on the show other types of legislative activity that takes place in our states, but I was hoping you could explain to our audience more information about what we call F3 legislation and 34 legislation, and perhaps you can tell us which states engage in these types of activities.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And when I mentioned earlier that right now I'm in the process of working with the states about what their legislative priorities will be for 2026, this is one of the things I'm talking about, because not every state right now will be looking to necessarily pursue passing a COS application. Of course, 19 states have already done so. but those state teams stay in place, which is so important. And they look for other good legislation to engage in, and they maintain their relationships with the state legislators. It's absolutely crucial that we do that. So F3, the three Fs are federalism, freedom, and fundamental rights. So it's typically our past states that look for good legislation that touches on one of those issues. And we often partner with organizations like Alliance Defending Freedom. They have great state legislation on those types of issues that they are pushing in various states. So often our states that have already passed the COS application, those teams will get involved in advocating for instance, parental rights legislation or protecting women's sports legislation, that kind of thing. In addition to past states pursuing that, we're also open to other states pursuing those types of bills, particularly in a state that's highly unlikely to really gain traction with the COS application. And often, for instance, in maybe a purple or blue state, that state might have legislation that's really good on something like protecting free speech on college campuses. A bill like that can actually get bipartisan support. So by supporting something like that, the state team can begin to really develop and build and grow their relationships, even with Democrat state legislators, which of course is really valuable. So that's F3. 34 Ready refers to legislation that prepares the state legislature procedurally for the nation's first Article 5 convention. So it sets forth the procedure that the legislature will use when it's time to select and commission and instruct its commissioners to the Article 5 convention, how it's going to exercise oversight, how it would go about recalling one of its delegates or commissioners if it needed to do that, what are the requirements for a person to become a delegate or commissioner. That's 34 Ready legislation. And we typically encourage teams to pursue those bills if they are, again, in a state that's unlikely to gain traction pursuing the COS application due to the political climate of the state legislature, or a state that's already passed the COS application but doesn't yet have that procedural piece in place.
Great stuff, and really exciting because it gives states that you may not have listed before as states that are on the cusp of passing our resolution, the opportunity to still be active with their legislature, whether it's with F3, whether it's with 34 Ready, and we're still advancing the ball for freedom and in the Article 5 movement. So exciting things to be a part of. I know as the regional director in several of the past states, I've been a part of this, and I really appreciate my teams and all of the hard work. And you mentioned Alliance Defending Freedom. I know we've also worked with Heritage before, and we've also worked with think tanks in other states. I think Mike Defendahl mentioned Texas Public Policy Foundation. Those types of coalitions that we're able to build are vitally important for what we're trying to accomplish. And so it's exciting that we have these opportunities within Convention of States. I also want to take a minute to say Producer G sent me a note, and I have to correct the record. We did cover the Idaho polling. How dare I forget that? And how dare I doubt us? I mean, it's unbelievable. But thank you, Producer G, for letting me know so I could set the record straight on that. Always good to cover that again, though.
Yes.
So, Rita, there's a new tactic that we unveiled last legislative session, and we also discussed it on the show during our Action at Home segment. Would you tell our audience again, though, about the social media warrior actions that take place and why this small action could make a very big difference for us?
I am chomping at the bit to tell you about this, Jonathan. Well, you already know about it, but to tell your audience about it, because this, I think, for me, has been one of the most exciting developments in our legislative strategy this year. And this aspect of it is brand new this year. So here's how it works. Every day, I choose or create or ask our comms team to create, I should say, a social media post that is specifically designed to help us win over key legislators in particular states where we're close to being able to pass. Our activists who are engaged in this program, and I hope that's going to be all of you watching starting tomorrow, go to that particular post, which is identified on our Social Media Warrior landing page. And I'm going to tell you where you can find that in just a few minutes. They go to that page and they'll read a short message from me. I put this up every single day about that day's social media post and how we're planning to use it as part of our legislative strategy. So I'm giving you a little window into our legislative strategy for a particular state and the key legislators in that state. We tell you exactly what to do on that landing page, but it pretty much always amounts to you go to the post. The link is right there. You just click and it'll take you to a Facebook post and or an X post, whichever you have, or if you have both. And what you'll do is you'll add your comments to that post. Sometimes there will be opposition on there and you'll get to respond to opposition. Sometimes you'll just add your 2 cents about whatever the post is, whether it's Michael Ferris giving testimony or a volunteer making a point in response to opposition. So you all will add your comments. You'll like it. If you want to share it on your own page, that's great too. And then what happens is later, usually the next day or a couple more days after we've given everyone a chance to do that, the state team or the regional director will go onto the post and tag the key legislators that we're trying to target. We have their social media profiles, so we'll use their profiles to tag them. I don't know about you, but if I get tagged in a post on social media, I almost always look to see what it is and why is someone tagging me in it. So by participating in this program, you're helping to get the eyes of those key target legislators on the post because the more engagement the post has, the more likely someone is to actually look at it. And B, you're adding comments that might actually be persuasive to the legislator and help us to gain their support. So you can make a huge difference, I really believe, in our legislative strategy by taking 3 minutes a day to do this. And in fact, Jonathan, earlier this year, heading into a vote in Montana, there were a group of legislators we believed, and our lobbyists confirmed that these were going to be no votes. We were just getting started with this program then, and we started tagging them in some posts. And then without any explanation, a handful of them ended up being yes votes. So I really believe that this program works and has huge potential and can be even bigger. If you want to participate, it's conventionofstates.com/social. It's so simple. I promise it's really simple and it really doesn't take more than 3 minutes.
And it's the very definition of an action at home, right? So if you are sitting there on your computer and you are an activist right now, you can go to conventionofstates.com/social. You will see today's mission and you'll be able to go in there, whether it's on your Facebook account or your X account, like the post, comment on it, share it with your friends and family. And as you heard from Rita right there, this has an impact on these legislators that we're tagging there. So this is a small thing that you could do, but you will have a huge impact on our mission. So, and if you haven't signed up to become an activist, make sure that you're doing that. You'll get notifications, email messages from our staff about these missions daily. But of course, you can always go back to conventionofstates.com/social to see that day's mission.
That's right.
So, Rita, as we close out our conversation tonight, I think we would be remiss if we didn't address how people are feeling today. And I think you talked about it a little bit earlier when we were talking about Virginia. Many people are feeling discouraged after what happened last night. And some people, some of our activists were even feeling like they were facing an uphill battle even before we had the election results roll in Virginia and New Jersey and New York. It's always a challenge, I think, for our activists in some of these states to move the resolution forward. That's why we have those opportunities like our F3 legislation and maybe even our 34 legislation, 34 ready legislation as other opportunities. But still, it feels like it could be a tough slog to move our movement forward in some of these states. We had an activist from New Jersey, Francesca Norden, write in about this, and her question was, what advice do you have for COS activists in the trenches in these states, and how would you encourage these supporters?
Yeah, well, I'm going to say something, I'm going to ask something that's hard of you, and that is stick with it even though you don't see the results right now. And I'd like to remind you of something that Mark Meckler often reminds me of, and that is that our job is to be faithful. The results are up to God, and He alone defines what success is in any given situation. So I'm going to just ask you and challenge you to stay at it. I want to remind you that relationship really is key in what we're trying to do. Relationships are the reasons that we've passed out of committees in Hawaii and Massachusetts. You know, if you were to just look at the composition of those committees, you would say, forget it. There's no way. It's just not possible. But because our teams worked hard and developed relationships with those legislators, what seemed impossible became possible. I want to point out that we have had Democrat legislators who didn't know much about what we were doing, probably didn't care that much for it, probably didn't even really agree with it, who have voted yes on Convention of States and told us that the only reason they voted yes was because they got a nice handwritten letter from a constituent asking them to please support it. Relationships are key, and we can all be building those relationships no matter what the political climate looks like in the state. All of these legislators are people and respond to relationship. That doesn't mean it's going to result in a deep blue state passing the COS application, but the work that you're doing has such value even apart from passing the COS application, because you're carrying a banner. You're carrying a banner of truth. You're carrying a banner on behalf of our Constitution and the rule of law. And doing that matters, even apart from the results in terms of votes or legislation passing. And then, as a practical matter, I would encourage you to think about whether a good F3 initiative might be right for your state, depending on where you are. Your RD can help you sort through that. I'm happy to help in making that decision. But I think it would just be great for a state that just isn't going to make progress with actually passing the COS application to find a good bipartisan bill that you can really get behind and support that will help you in building those relationships with your legislators. So that's my advice for you. I know it's hard. I am inspired by you all the time. I love even just seeing the pictures that we got to see with the COS Now segment. It's very inspiring, and I just appreciate everything y'all are doing.
Well, thank you so much, Rita. We appreciate you and everything that you're doing for us, and we know how busy you are, and we're so thankful that you took the time to be here with us tonight for Convention of States at Home. Thank you for everything that you do. God bless you, and I know you and I will be talking again soon.
Thanks, Jonathan. It was an honor to be here. Have a good night.
Thank you so much. Folks, we are so grateful and lucky to have Rita in the fight with us. And we're thankful that she took the time out. And, again, what she mentioned there towards the end, relationships are so key to what we are trying to accomplish with Convention of States. If we're going to rebuild a culture of self-governance, it's going to require that we build relationships, not just with our state legislators, but with other people as well, with our fellow neighbors. And in this political climate, it's harder than ever before to do that, but we care about this country. And we know that the freedom and prosperity and liberty that is available to us as Americans is so vitally important. And we need to do everything we can to preserve it for posterity. That's why we're in this fight. That's why we're doing the difficult things. And that's why it's so important that we focus on those relationships and not lose hope and keep moving forward. I personally think the F3 initiative is critically important to the future of our organization. It will give us the opportunity in some of these states to build those relationships, but also gain a reputation as an organization that is able to accomplish big things in those states. So if you haven't, definitely take a look at our F3 initiatives and make sure you speak to your regional directors about that. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's go ahead now and move to 5 for 5. So as I mentioned earlier tonight, we decided to slide 5 for 5 down the schedule because it pairs well with our action at home. Both of these segments we are about to go through, we're going to educate you and prepare our supporters and activists utilizing an important tool known as COS University. So check out these new COSU course. Check out this new COSU course featuring the nation's foremost expert on Article 5, Professor Robert Nadelson.
So they wanted a constitution that would last, and that meant the Constitution had to have an amendment process to deal with changed conditions, to deal with other potential problems that might arise. They understood this, the framers understood this from the very first. On the first active day of the Constitutional Convention, when the tall, charismatic, handsome governor of Virginia, Edmund Randolph, stood up to offer the Virginia Plan, which was the basis of the early discussions in the Constitutional Convention. That Virginia Plan included a provision for amendment, not polished yet, but you can read it on the board. Provision ought to be made for the amendment of Articles of Union, and, this is important, the assent of the national legislature ought not to be required thereto. In other words, we should be able to amend this Constitution without the permission or agreement of Congress. And that was from the very beginning. Sometimes you hear people say, well, the convention idea was added at the last minute of the Constitutional Convention. No, it was there from the very beginning. In the ensuing weeks, the delegates debated over a potential constitution, and they agreed among themselves. They passed resolutions, and they piled up these resolutions. And then in late July, they took this whole pile of resolutions and they dumped it into the hands of a committee called the Committee of Detail, headed by South Carolina's greatest lawyer, John Rutledge, excuse me. Edmund was his brother. And that committee of 5 men was put to work to come up with a first draft of a constitution. They got to work while everybody else left, went off on vacation, or in the case of Madison and Washington, they went fishing. When the Committee of Detail finished and brought back its report and its draft constitution on August 6, it included this language: on application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the states for an amendment of this constitution, the legislature of the United States shall call a convention for that purpose. So the states were to initiate the drive for amendments. They were to demand a convention. If 2/3 demanded a convention, Congress would have to call one. But at this stage, the convention not only proposed the amendments and drafted the amendments, it also enacted the amendments. It was an all-powerful convention. And so that was not acceptable. And so on September 10th, 1787, Elbridge Gerry, anyone know what Elbridge Gerry is famous for? Yes, sir. What? The gerrymander, yeah. He pronounced it Gary, not Jerry, but today we say the gerrymander. He later became governor of Massachusetts and vice president of the United States, but he's still remembered for the gerrymander. At any rate, Elbridge Gerry stood up and said, look, we don't want an all-powerful convention. Any amendment should be ratified by the states. And the convention agreed with that. Alexander Hamilton, always a fan of a strong central government, said, well, you know, Congress should also be able to propose. Because Congress is going to be working with this system, and they might have ideas too. And the delegates agreed. As an alternative to state proposal, Congress should propose. Unfortunately, something happened there. There was some bad drafting, and some people noticed that it looked like, after they changed the amendment article, it looked like only Congress could propose. So on September 15th, George Mason of Virginia stands up and says, hey, look, let's amend this thing to make it absolutely certain that the states can propose amendments, not just Congress. And that was agreed to unanimously by the states present.
It is incredible to hear that history, even more incredible to hear it from Professor Robert Nadelson, who I mentioned is the nation's foremost expert on Article 5. You can read up on some of his work on Convention of States' website. You can also go to Article 5 Information Center. But I'm really, really excited that we have that presentation now available on COS University. That is the Gov 200 course that's available. And as Producer G had up on the screen there a few minutes ago, you can right now, at your fingertips, go to cosuniversity.com. We're going to now go into the action at home, where this is the opportunity for you to take steps to advance the Article 5 mission. You can go to cosuniversity.com. You can register, or if you already have a Convention of States account available, you can sign in, and that's the screen there where you would register or sign in. And then you will have access to these courses. Now, if you are not signed up as a Convention of States activist, you will only have access to 4 courses. And those courses are what we call the introductory courses to Convention of States. But if you are a COS activist, you will have access to all of the courses, including the one that you just saw there from Professor Robert Nadelson. But there are so many other great courses available. Responding to Opposition, where Mark Meckler and Rick Green talk about all of the questions that we deal with. An introduction to Convention of States. You'll also have the opportunity to get introduced to all of the various roles that we have at Convention of States. Lots of great things that are there. You'll hear from Michael Farris. You'll hear from Dr. Tom Coburn. so many amazing people with a lot of great information available to you, and you will have a great opportunity to learn not only about Convention of States, learning about American history, and also ways that you can take action, ways that you can take what we are giving to you and apply it as an activist on the ground. So make sure, please, that you go to cosuniversity.com, you sign up, you create your account, or if you already have an account, log in and check out some of these courses. I think you will really appreciate the content that's available there. And we are looking at ways that we can enhance the content. Some of it is a little dated, so we're going back in there, we're updating some of that, and we have other new courses that are going to be coming as well. So exciting things there for COS University. All right, folks, now let's go ahead and check the Minutemen Mailbag. All right, so for this month, for Minutemen Mailbag, in our effort to educate everyone and make sure you're aware that the government is shut down, we actually asked a question of our supporters: how can we prevent future government shutdowns, or what may be the solution to ending these government shutdowns? And so we have a couple of answers here. The first one from Gina McCutcheon is she says to abolish the party system. They're all acting like this is the damn Super Bowl, and who wins is more important than actually doing their job and representing their constituents. When you take the team mentality away from them, they'll have to look at the issues. I certainly appreciate that sentiment, Gina. My only concern is, what would we replace the party system with, right? I'm not entirely sure what would come next, or even what the solution is as to how we would abolish the party system. Obviously, that's something that's been around since the very beginning of our nation, and so I'm just not 100% sure how we would go about abolishing the party system. But I certainly understand with what you're saying, in that it's more about people, what jersey you're wearing, and less about the actual issues. I would even go so far as to say it's even less about the jersey, whether it's Republican or Democrat, because it seems like there's really a uniparty in Washington, D.C., and it's more about them and not we the people. And I think that's a major problem, and that's what we're trying to address with Convention of States. Gerald Kaufman wrote in, and he said, if they don't fully fund the government by October 1st, Congress does not get paid until the full budget is passed. Additionally, they are not eligible for re-election. Again, I love that idea, Gerald. But again, how is Congress going to do that? Are they going to put those measures in place and rein themselves in? No. So the solution has to come from outside. It's got to come from us, we the people. And I think the most effective way to do that is through an Article 5 convention. But I agree with you, Gerald. John Luce or Luce wrote in, forgive me, John, for butchering your name there, call for an interim interstate convention to address this issue only. Yep, I agree, John. That is an option, but again, that's a challenge. As you know, we've got 19 states that have passed our resolution, and it's taken us a while to get there, and we're trying to get across the finish line. But there are still many more states that we have to get. So doing so quickly, an interim convention, just addressing that one issue, it's got to go through the same process of getting the state legislatures to pass that. And I don't know that it would address this current shutdown, but it may be something to look at. I still think it's probably better. Let's just go with our COS resolution and address a lot more of the issues than just this shutdown problem. And the last one comes from, I believe it's Suan Hall. Again, forgive me for butchering names here, folks. I really do apologize. Gut the filibuster via the nuclear option. So this was something that I was talking about with Rita earlier, and I thought she made a lot of great points, but she said she was open to other thoughts on this. And I have to say, I'm conflicted about the nuclear option. I understand the feeling that, hey, things are going well for us right now, or perhaps maybe we like the people that are in charge right now, and so it'd be easier for them to get some of these things done. But then people would say, well, what happens? It's not so fun when the rabbit's got the gun, right? So what would happen then? I'm not as concerned about that, to be honest with you, because it feels like it doesn't matter when the other side may have control. They've been ramming things through executive order and everything like that. So that's not so much of a concern to me. My concern, I think, would be, and I heard this from Steve Deace, one of our endorsers, mentioned this on his program recently. Do the people that are in charge right now, are the Republicans that are in charge right now, would they be willing to, if they were to abolish the nuclear option, willing to then try and advance an aggressive agenda to really start to advance liberty in our country? I'm not so sure they would be. So I'm not so sure getting rid of the nuclear option would be the right thing to do. Though I do understand also what President Trump is saying, that this could impact the midterm elections next year. And we had Steve Deace on earlier this year, and he said that this year was the biggest and most important year because next year is going to be an election year, and then who knows what will happen after that. Even still, though, I don't know that removing the nuclear option is what's best for our country, and I don't know if it makes a difference for the midterms next year. It's a tough one. I'm really not sure what I would advocate for if I were in there, but Suin, I totally understand where you're coming from, and it is something fascinating that we will be watching over the next couple of weeks as to whether or not the nuclear option is taken and advanced. And folks, anytime that you want to respond to the questions that we put out there, you can go ahead and check it out at conventionofstates.com/mailbag. We'd love to hear from you, and we want to give you an opportunity to have your question or your comment read on the air. So, folks, just a reminder, all of the COS at Home shows air live on the first Wednesday of every month at 8 o'clock Eastern Time. The next show will be on Wednesday, December 3rd at 8 o'clock Eastern, and my guest will be one of Convention of States' newest endorsers, the founder of America's Frontline Doctors, Dr. Simone Gold. And I'm excited about this because we really have not had the opportunity to discuss the MAHA movement or the American healthcare system on this program. So I think the conversation with Dr. Gold is going to be fascinating. I really hope that you will join us for that one. Again, that is Wednesday, December 3rd at 8 o'clock Eastern Time. And I really hope you'll join us for that. Ladies and gentlemen, as always, this has been just so much fun. I really do enjoy our COS at Home program and talking with you once a month about some of the important things that are going on in our nation. I hope that you've enjoyed the program, but I also hope it's been helpful to you. Make sure you check out COS University. Thanks again to Rita Peters for joining us tonight. A big thanks, as always, to my partner in crime, the legendary producer G, for all of the hard work that he does behind the scenes. But of course, the greatest thanks goes to all of you for your continued support of Convention of States and the Article 5 movement. It's important to remember that despite all of the problems we currently face in our country, despite discouraging election results, you and I, we the people, are the solution. Thank you again for being here tonight. And as we close out tonight's call, in honor of Thanksgiving, I wanted to read to you George Washington's Thanksgiving Proclamation of 1789. Yes, if you can believe it, Thanksgiving is actually 3 weeks away from tomorrow. Sorry to panic you, but if you would, please listen in here to President Washington. By the President of the United States of America, a proclamation. Whereas it is the duty of all nations to acknowledge the providence of Almighty God, to obey his will, to be grateful for his benefits, and humbly to implore his protection and favor. And whereas both houses of Congress have by their joint committee requested me to recommend to the people of the United States a day of public thanksgiving and prayer to be observed by acknowledging with grateful hearts the many signal favors of Almighty God, especially by affording them an opportunity peaceably to establish a form of government for their safety and happiness. Now, therefore, I do recommend and assign Thursday, the 26th day of November next, to be devoted by the people of these states to the service of that great and glorious being, who is the beneficent author of all the good that was, that is, or that will be, that we may then all unite in rendering unto him our sincere and humble thanks for his kind care and protection of the people of this country previous to their becoming a nation, for the signal and manifold mercies and the favorable interpositions of his providence, which we experienced in the course and conclusion of the late war, for the great degree of tranquility, union, and plenty which we have since enjoyed, for the peaceable and rational manner in which we have been enabled to establish constitutions of government for our safety and happiness, and particularly the national one now lately instituted, for the civil and religious liberty with which we are blessed, and the means we have for acquiring and diffusing useful knowledge, and in general for all the great and various favors which he hath been pleased to confer upon us. And also that we may then unite in most humbly offering our prayers and supplications to the great Lord and ruler of nations, and beseech him to pardon our national and other transgressions, to enable us all, whether in public or private stations, to perform our several and relative duties properly and punctually, to render our national government a blessing to all the people by constantly being a government of wise, just, and constitutional laws, discreetly and faithfully executed and obeyed, to protect and guide all sovereigns and nations, especially such as have shown kindness unto us, and to bless them with good government, peace, and concord, to promote the knowledge and practice of true religion and virtue, and the increase of science among them and us, and generally to grant unto all mankind such a degree of temporal prosperity as he alone knows to be best. Given under my hand at the city of New York, the 3rd day of October in the year of our Lord, 1789, and that is George Washington. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us tonight. God bless you and your families. I want to wish you a happy and blessed Thanksgiving. Our country matters, and it is so important that we keep up the fight. And we must also thank Almighty God for all of the blessings that he continues to give to us. God bless you and have a good night.